Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Adam Compain, who is CEO at Clear Metal. And today we're going to talk about AI, machine learning, and the power of predictive logistics. Now, these are all topics that are getting a lot of attention these days, but they're also generating a lot of questions. What are these technologies? How do I use them in my operations and derive value from them? What's real today and versus what's hype? Right, and how do I get started to kind of start, making sure that I'm ahead of the curve, if you will, or not falling behind in these areas. So those are just some of the questions we're going to explore in today's episode. And it's certainly great to have Adam on the program to share his advice and insights on this topic, considering he's on the front lines of this with a lot of the companies that he works with. So Adam, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. Very, very good to be here.
So Adam, before we kind of dive into kind of the really meaty stuff here of AI, machine learning, and predictive logistics, I always like to ask, my guests, particularly the first time on the program, a little bit about how they even got involved with this whole industry to begin with. So, why don't we start there? Very briefly, just tell us a little bit about, your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and kind of what your current role and responsibilities are there at Clear Metal.
Yeah, sure. So really the supply chain always drew me in, honestly. It's a fundamental human need. The scale of the industry is unbelievably large and complex. And I also know pretty challenging. And so it was actually after finishing a number of years, 5 years at Google, working on their latest technologies, and then going back to Stanford to get my MBA, that I finally decided to get into the industry, going over to Hong Kong and working at 00 for a short amount of time, and really seeing from their perspective, from a service provider's perspective, how challenging this industry actually is, all the things that they have to deal with to serve shipper customers. And from the flip side, everything a retailer or manufacturer has to go through to really get things from where they're made and where they have them, all the way to where consumers at the end of the day need them. And so it was really this overall effort that we now call supply chain that drew me in and led me to not only discovering the challenges, but also realizing that there's a massive opportunity to help people in the supply chain with a fundamentally different kind of technology that is AI and all the things we'll talk about today. And so that's the shift from my background being squarely in technology and shifting over to the shipping, logistics, and supply chain industry. My role at Clear Metal is the founder of the company and CEO. Therein, a lot of different responsibilities, but namely what I find myself doing today is working with our customers to understand exactly what they need in this new era of logistics and supply chain, and evangelizing in a sort of way, educating folks in the industry about how they can leverage the latest and greatest technologies coming out of places like Silicon Valley for the benefit of their own operations, for the benefit of their service providers, and for the benefit at the end of the day of end consumers.
Yeah, no, that's a great that's a great background. I mean, you don't hear too often companies leaving Google, going into the logistics industry. So I think that's great. I think it also shed some light on, I think for a long time, supply chain logistics, a lot of particularly young professionals didn't even think about that as a career path. And I think you're a great example of how, there's so much excitement, so much opportunity for innovation. And obviously the role that the technology plays in this whole industry and will continue to play in this industry, moving forward. So a lot of folks think that, I want to work for Google or Apple or, all the brand name technology companies, but there's a lot going on in the logistics and supply chain space, not only from a technology standpoint, but a lot of innovation to take place from a number of different levels. So I think you'll be a hit with a lot of young professionals that, are looking to figure out their career path down the road. So let's now talk about this topic, right? I mean, because I agree with you. I think there's a lot of education that needs to take place. There's a lot of conversations that need to take place to really understand, the opportunities and the power that technology can play in these areas. Like I said in my opening remarks, artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive, logistics. I mean, these are terms that we hear a lot of these days, but what I find is a lot of supply chain logistics, executives are still kind of confused by what these terms mean and their value proposition. So just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page, I mean, can you provide kind of a clear or simple definition, of these terms and shed some light on why they're getting so much attention these days?
Yeah, sure. I think really what you said in the end there, why are these getting so much attention these days? And before we go through, and I'm happy to sort of define these different terms, I think the most important thing to understand is what we're talking about when we talk about AI and machine learning and data science is really a fundamentally different kind of computing than existed before. If you want to simplify it, the analogy we often use is it is the difference between a smartphone and a flip phone. It's the difference if we're going to battle between a sniper rifle and a slingshot. And what it is a type of computing technology that is a necessary co-pilot to making very complex decisions that we all have to make every day, whether it's personally using a smartphone to navigate the world and traffic and all those things, or in the supply chain, how to navigate all the exceptions and contingencies that go awry when you're dealing on a global scale. And so what we're really talking about, and the reason people are so excited is there's a new type, a fundamentally new type of technology that's come about that will radically change many aspects of our lives from personal to business applications. And if you look at the business leaders out there and the companies out there like Amazon, like Facebook, like my former employer, Google, they have all said, we are putting a stake in the ground. Everything we do will be AI assisted from now on. And so I think that's what the excitement comes from. And I think that's why it's so interesting. It's very much the same type of wave that we saw when business went generally from analog to using computers and desktop computers, to fundamentally use computers to do things differently and make better decisions and be assisted like every day. I mean, you and I are even talking on a computer right now. But I think to ground that, let's talk about the actual definitions. So when we speak about AI, it obviously stands for artificial intelligence. And AI is really a umbrella term. It's a type of and set of technologies that are leveraging this different kind of computing, which I'll get into. And AI, it's named artificial intelligence because in many ways it mimics the way humans behave and think and pattern recognize. It just does it to a level that's an order of magnitude, many orders of magnitude more sophisticated. And I'll get into it just to kind of list out a few. When we hear big data, that's a big term out there. All that really means, honestly, is a whole lot of data. And we're talking massive amounts of data. Often companies we deal with aren't even necessarily in the realm of big data, surprisingly, but it just means a lot of data. When we talk about machine learning, one of the core tenets of artificial intelligence, machine learning is a different kind of computing in two ways. First, machine learning means instead of programming and prescribing a static algorithm to understand the way the world works, putting data in one side of the algorithm and getting an output out the other side like an equation. Instead, machine learning looks at a ton of data, and from that data, it discovers and recognizes patterns that would be otherwise unforeseeable to the human eye, or unforeseeable even to the best trained statistician or person who writes algorithms to map out. So it basically, one, looks at the data and from the data discovers patterns and correlations between those data. Secondly, what machine learning does in its name is every new piece of information or data it receives, it will actually learn over time, right? So this is mimicking the way humans do it, but in both camps, it can see patterns and correlations far better than we can, and it can learn with a level of perception that is far beyond at least me. And so that's really what that means. And another popular term I'll bring up now is IoT. That's really the Internet of Things. That is physically making physical assets into digital ones, often by equipping them with physical hardware and creating sensors out of them. And in our view, that's really just another source of data, whether you manually input data or whether you capture it from a sensor. It's really all just inputs of data. But really, I think the fundamental thing to take away is this is a type of computing that moves far beyond statistics and static algorithms and is a learning type of system that can see things far better than we can.
Yeah, no, I think I love your definitions because they are, I love the analogy of the smartphone versus the flip phone, because I think most people can recognize that. I think, I know that a lot of people early on might have resisted the smartphone, but I don't think, aside from maybe a grandparent or two here or there, might be still holding on to the flip phones today, just because it's become such a pervasive part of how we, live up both our personal and business life. Thinking about a kind of a new form of computing, I think is also a helpful, paradigm there to kind of, one of the things I wrote recently was we have to unlearn supply chain management. I wrote a post kind of titled that. And in many ways it's saying, what I hear a lot from supply chain logistics professionals is that they are tasked with trying to make smarter decisions faster. And what they're finding is that their existing technologies, their existing processes, organizational structures, so on and so forth, are just not keeping up with the rapid pace of decision making that they need to make. And that's the way I kind of put it into context. These new technologies, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and kind of the underpinnings is really kind of the next evolution in helping companies make smarter decisions faster. Do you see that as well?
That's exactly it. And honestly, why we started the company. When I was in Hong Kong and deeply researching and speaking to people in the industry, what became very clear is that people, after a few decades of working in supply chain, had actually become very strong at making the decisions they needed to make, the caveat being with the tools that they had in their hands. And what was clear is that they simply didn't have the right technologies and tools in their hands, the right tools to make sense of the 800 million booking revisions that happen per year, the how many millions and billions of permutations and combinations of things that can happen when you're trying to manage a supply chain. And so the company was started to equip supply chain operators, largely in the retail and manufacturing space, with that better CoPilot and tool, in the same way you and I don't leave the house without a smartphone in our pocket. And the name of the company, interestingly enough, is named after that. It's named Clear Metal because what we saw was supply chain operators focusing largely on the physical operations and physical economies of scale to solve problems. When coming out of a place like Google, what we learned was there are ways to leverage technology and be smarter as opposed to being bigger to solve problems. And so Clear Metal, the name, stands for seeing through the metal assets and the physicality and actually looking at the underlying information, data, customer behaviors, shipment flows, and mastering that before you then are aided with the right decision-making tools. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I'm glad you tied it in with the name of the company because I was kind of curious at how the company came about, the name came about. So yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's another good way to kind of look at it. So let's talk now about predictive logistics, kind of another term here. And of course, there's a lot of buzz about moving away from being reactive, right, to being actually be able to predict things, and then that leads to then being more analytics being leading to prescriptive types of outputs out of these technologies. How does predictive logistics fit into the broader landscape of technology and everything we just talked about here?
Sure. So predictive logistics is a new category. We think it's a big category, and we view ourselves as helping pioneer this type of effort into the supply chain space. And predictive logistics really stands for a few things. It's what I mentioned in using intelligence over scale. It is exactly that, as being proactive and predictive instead of reactive and just managing exceptions after the fact. And it is also this notion that we've heard from around the world, from our customers, of wanting to be much more marketing driven and customer driven and data driven rather than sort of operationally based. And so this category is really standing for that next generation of logistics or supply chain and needing to get there. Yeah, I'll leave it there for a sec.
So what's required to make predictive logistics work? I mean, I assume we you mentioned big data before, right? So I assume timely and accurate data is part of it. But what else? What else is needed kind of to make this work?
Sure, and I'm remembering the second part of your question there on how does this really fit into the overall context of everything else that's going on in digital transformation in this industry? It really lives kind of across it all. And inside it. I mean, we hear a lot customers trying to upgrade their infrastructure, right? Get from on-premise software to the cloud, building a new data lake, implementing a new ERP. Those are all fantastic components of what you need to survive in this next wave of supply chain. Predictive logistics really spans across that. It's wonderful to have obviously data in the cloud. You can then manipulate that data and do intelligent things with it. It's wonderful to have that data lake and centralized systems and things like that. Predictive logistics is really sort of intelligence platform that you can think of to not only make sense of that data wherever it lives inside of your company, but then leverage best technologies like AI and machine learning to solve other challenges, from the core data issue operators deal with to different types of use cases, which I know we'll get into. But in terms of what's required, I think a few things. First, I'd say a partner. Supply chain operators and large manufacturers and retailers have grown up and built fantastic multi-billion-dollar companies around manufacturing, sourcing, manufacturing, production, transport, and distribution of goods, not around developing software and technology. And so I'll use the mobile phone analogy again. You and I are not out there trying to develop our own, iPhone. We are, going to the Apple store and picking it up from them because they're experts in building this stuff, and we need their tools to assist what we want to do every day. So I'd say first and foremost, a partner. I mean, most companies aren't set up to develop their own software. It's an incredibly expensive endeavor, and it's a different core competency. The second thing is data. Data is obviously needed to get to the future of predictive logistics and enhance predictive visibility. The misconception, I'll say, is that you need different and new kinds of data, that we need all containers, let's say, or pallets to be equipped with a sensor before we can even do things. It's actually a fallacy. There's enough data in the industry that you can leverage it as long as you can make sense of it using machine learning and do things like predictions and intelligent insights off of that. You don't need all different sources and even data sources that don't exist yet. Fantastic when it comes, but you can take advantage today with the data you have today. And then third, it's funny you mentioned, the parallel of people thinking it would be crazy to have smartphones in their pockets. And of course, now only, potentially a grandparent is averse to it. Ironically, at Google, I worked on the mobile team in about 2008 or 9 when smartphones were proliferating. And in many ways, that job felt like how it feels today to help evangelize and educate people about Clear Metal and the AI operating system we're building for supply chain. My message here, what's required is to move now. It's interesting to me how much we forget from one technology revolution to the next, how quickly this stuff becomes commonplace and almost ridiculous if you don't have it in your hands. And so the same exact thing that we saw in the mobile industry, going from wondering whether people will ever buy something on a phone or use a phone more than a few times a day, to it being prolific, the same thing is happening in this industry with AI. It is a fundamental backbone of how we'll operate, the same way we operate with phones and the same way business operates with personal computers.
Yeah, I've witnessed some of that myself throughout my career. I always tell the story when I worked back at Motorola back in the early to mid 90s, and the internet and the web was just about to, was just making inroads, if you will. And Motorola would not allow for a long time, employees to access the web. They had a lot of serious concerns about, employee productivity, people surfing the internet for sports sites and inappropriate sites and just wasting a lot of time. And it was not more than 3 years later that we had the the .com and e-commerce and everything else. So it kind of was this wave that took over. And same thing with even the Motorola too with the cell phones, right? They missed the the analog to digital wave, and they also were late to the standard phone to the smartphone as well. And we see what repercussions were there. I just want to with regards to data. And I love the point that you don't need you don't need to have everything Internet of Things enabled to and all that kind of future data, if you will, to make this possible. You can use some of the data you already have. But I think some of the limitations that with the data we already have for a lot of companies is that it's either not complete, it's not accurate, or it's kind of latent, right? Because there's a lot of EDI in this industry, right? So it's batch oriented, and so you're seeing things or companies move more towards web services and APIs, and obviously just using more wireless type of capabilities to transmit information. Are you seeing that as well in terms of as a way to reduce some of that friction, or at least improve the quality of the data?
Exactly. So I think the misconception people have is that you can't take advantage of, just call it AI, until you first solve this data challenge, right? The dirty, siloed, inaccessible, unusable, unclean data. The reality, and our company is a perfect example of this, is that we use AI to solve the data problem. And so they're very much intermingled. And we absolutely agree that the first order problem is really that data challenge that everyone deals with. And I'll give you a very tangible example. The 315 message set, container movement events, come in, out of whack, unsequenced. They have missing data elements, duplicates. Often it doesn't make sense and it's not readable. Our company has spent, I'll admit, honestly, over half of our development and engineering time with literally some of the top AI engineers in the world from Stanford and elsewhere, solving that core data challenge, getting the 315 message set, sequencing it properly, cutting out the duplicates, filling in the gaps, and mapping it to what we call our global schema so that the data exists from EDI in API format to then make sense of and do intelligent things with. And anyone saying that you can just throw a machine learning algorithm at the current set of data and have it, speak magic, that's not going to happen. And so it is so crucial to first have the application of AI solve that. And that's exactly what we've done because it is such a massive problem.
Great. No, that's a great example there. So I mean, to extend that, I mean, can you walk us through some other use cases for applying, predictive logistics today? What industries or types of companies are some of the early adopters here?
Sure. So we're working with some of the largest importers and exporters. So shippers, namely, and we can, for ease, we can stick with that same 315 container movement event example. So even just looking at door to door in the transport space, the decisions you make along the way are very complex and they matter a lot in terms of inventory on hand. So if you're thinking about in the planning stage, right, determining whether or not a purchase order should then get booked and go on air versus ocean, that's a difference between reliability and a lot of dollars. And so at the outset, using a technology like the ones we're deploying, a supply chain operator or a transportation manager could make the decision pre-booking whether or not they need to stay on that service string with a certain carrier, switch to another, and be given confidence intervals about the likelihood that that shipment will arrive on time and when they need it. Or they actually do need to pony up the extra dollars and ship by air, spending a lot more, but ensuring that reliability. So there's a level of decision making in the transport space that is crucially important. If we continue down the example, as things transport across the world, we know that about 1 out of 4 shipments, an exception happens. And if there's, for example, over one transshipment, the likelihood of delay is over 50%. And a delay in a transshipment will be on average a 2-week delay. So thinking about inventory on hand in that context. So you can use predictive logistics and the data intelligence platform to predict exceptions that will go awry, and potentially, depending on the timeout, look at alternate routes, which would reduce risk. Ongoing, whether you're a shipper yourself or the 3PL managing that shipper, you can give better customer service by alerting that importer or alerting the end consignee of that cargo that things will go awry or be late to allow them to plan. In the terminal space, we also hear a lot about this, that there is so much inefficiency wrapped around the drayage opportunity and not being able to see when your container is available for pickup, that using the same kind of tool you can predict and see visibility within the port to understand when to come get your box, on and on and on, all the way even into arrival at the warehouse. We were speaking with a very large European retailer explaining how useful our capabilities would be for helping staff labor and optimize bay usage at their distribution network if they're better able to predict, especially in peak season, the arrival times of those containers. So again, this is not end-to-end. We're just talking the example of door-to-door and just using sort of 315 message-like information to increase efficiencies across the whole chain.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. And, to touch back on kind of the data piece a little bit, as far as the predictive piece, I mean, there's a lot of discussion today about integrating, kind of third-party data out there around, let's say, weather events or, traffic, things like that. I mean, are those other inputs that go into this to help kind of with the predictive component of this?
Yeah, absolutely. They do, and our system is built for that. What's important to remember is the data you need and the data you need certainly depends on the use cases that you're going for. So, there sort of seems to be a little bit at the start of an arm race out there where whoever has the most data wins. And, if we were to take in Twitter signals and, microwave signals, that would be even better. For some use cases, yes. But the important thing to do in getting into these new technologies and the genius that comes is the application of the technology to the problem, not just the use of that technology or the use of a lot of data. So to answer your question, yes, third-party data is infused and in many ways makes things better. But it's not just about, who has the most data.
Yeah, no, I love that point because I've said that myself a lot of times, and I've had others, say the same thing. Sometimes the worst thing a company can do is kind of, chase the next new shiny thing, right? So, they may be excited by what we're talking about today, AI and machine learning and predictive logistics, and they might say, hey, we got to get this technology in here. But if they don't really understand or have a problem defined or understand what is it exactly that they're trying to solve, or what business benefit are they trying to achieve, or if they don't do that upfront work ahead of time and truly understand kind of what the mission is, then it's going to be a waste of time, a waste of money, or they're not going to get to where they want to be in the most efficient way possible. So I think it's easy to become enamored with technology, but absent a clear, defined goal and strategy and mission statement and problem statement you're trying to solve, I think you could get yourself in more trouble than benefits there.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
So, there's a lot to be done today. Obviously, I think this technology continues, to evolve. How do you see, AI and machine learning, predictive logistics evolving in the years ahead? What kind of new innovations are on the horizon?
There are so many. I'll go back to what we were talking about before around how this will very soon become commonplace and table stakes for anything you're trying to do in your organization, especially if it's around optimizing, creating efficiencies, and decision making, and especially before this world of automation that we're all trying to move to in one way or another. And I'll go back to my first comments around everything we do personally and in business will be transformed by these kind of technologies. So what are the next innovations? It's just enhancing every bit of the supply chain. But what I will say more concretely is a company needs to set itself up for success for this future supply chain and not miss out on this wave by getting a sort of intelligence platform that really does canonicalize or make sense of the data inside its house. It can then start leveraging that data for the next innovations to come, even if it's not foreseen what use cases they have. So it's sort of, I guess the question, same phone analogy, is sort of like going into the Verizon store and asking, which app they should download next. I think the more important question is, how do I get the smartphone in my hands? And then how do I access the app store, right? How do I get that technology? It comes preset with a bunch of features, but as things go, new things will be developed. And our platform, at least, is being set up so that others can plug into this, or a lot of the clean data can be eventually provisioned to the company, to the retailer manufacturer, for them to innovate on top of. And so it's really about setting yourself up and not missing out on this wave, then knowing exactly which app is going to be more popular than the next.
Right.
But what I would say is I wouldn't. I'd advise companies to make sure they are going at this a little bit with a holistic partner and a holistic strategy, just so that they don't end up with a string of apps and tools and band-aids that solve a little bit of a problem today without being able to get them to the next 10 years.
So I guess to paraphrase what you just said, I think it sounds like that the right approach, or the approach that you at least advocate, would be more of kind of a platform or a foundational approach, right? Because there is so much happening in this industry and with technology moving forward, that the ability to configure, adapt, whatever the future may hold, right, ultimately you need to have that kind of, to use the analogy, you need to have that smartphone, right? That can do just about anything you want it to do when you download different apps and everything else. But it's all based on that operating system, if you will, and kind of the meat of that. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? It's kind of like you want to have the infrastructure set, if you will, that's configurable, that's flexible, that's got the components of these core technologies, but let the future kind of define how those components are going to be put together to solve whatever opportunities or problems may lie ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our company is strategically out to build this, as you can think of, this AI operating system for the supply chain. And our platform, for example, comes with the preset apps that we think you most need and most need today to get valuable and tangible impact. And generally, that is what I'm saying. Of course, Adrian, I'm trying to hold back and not, toot our own horn too much and talk about our product and make a sale. So I'm speaking a little bit in generalities. But yeah, I think, our view is, hey, there is, first you need your data made sense of. Then on top of that, there are core applications you need today that are going to solve core problems you have today. And that's what we offer. But we're also intelligent enough to know that in the future, as your company maybe hires on some data scientists, or you have projects and issues you want to deal with and create a solution for that we may not be in the business to actually create, it will be very important for us to relinquish and release that data or those tools or those capabilities so that you as a company can innovate. And what I'm trying to say is really you need to get with a partner or a technology or a platform type strategy that will allow you to innovate yourself in the future or innovate with other third-party companies should some need come along that the company you're going with, like us, isn't in the business to create that app. So
Yep.
we're like the iOS operating system on your iPhone, and you may need the Bank of America app, and that's fantastic. We may not build that, but at least we're setting you up for that success later on.
Yeah, no, got it. And I completely agree. I mean, I think, and you see some of that already today, being able to provide, companies with the tools and the capabilities for them to self-innovate as well and be able to put that on the platform. I mean, just curious, do you see just another area that we didn't talk about today, but it's certainly generating a lot of buzz today is this whole area of virtual assistants and chatbots, like the Alexas and the Siris and all that. And certainly seen a lot in the news lately of, tech companies investing a lot of money into those areas. I mean, do you see that as the future user interface of some of these tools? Where we speak to the to the software, we speak to the computers, and then have it do its thing and speak back to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, a lot of that is here now. But sure, I think really what we're talking about, is formats, right? And our goal, and I think all of our goal in the business of creating this kind of stuff is to empower the person to make the best decisions they can, or assist them with the right decision-making capabilities. And whether that's, voice interface or just serving you the right information at the right time that you need it, whatever we can do as technology creators to make your life or your job easier or your company more profitable or the industry better, that's what we're here trying to do. And it is shocking though, as you paint those examples, how even the very far future is sort of right ahead of us.
Right. Well, Adam, I mean, we're kind of running short on time here, so I'm just going to go, my last question here to kind of wrap up the conversation. I mean, what actions, should companies take today to, kind of get started? I mean, and maybe what questions should they ask to, assess whether they've got some of the foundational things in place to ultimately achieve success in this area?
Yeah, I'll give you three. I think first is move now. I mean, let's not be caught again by the wave of computers and the wave of smartphones. Move now, because very, very soon it will be, you catching up. Secondly, I'd say, get the right partner. This is a long road, and get the right partner. And the questions I would ask around that are, a deep look into the actual technology, the team that created it, the expertise behind it. And I think also the vision that the company is on and where you and they want to go together. I think that's, some of the advice that I'd offer. And I think third is, again, it doesn't require much of anything else to get started today. So keep driving with the data lake, the new ERP implementation, the IoT, research and development. But you can start today and get a lot of real tangible value. Maybe that's the bell.
Great. No, I think that's some great advice and food for thought. And, like I always say at the end of our conversations, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics. And there's certainly a lot more to everything we talked about today. But I think, you provided some great insights and advice. I love the definitions you provided early on, and, kind of, shedding light on kind of the direction that this is all heading in, and kind of almost a sense of urgency, if you will, in terms of, not falling behind the curve here with, what's happening in this whole area. So Adam, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate it very much.
And I want to thank those of you that joined us today. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Clear Metal website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Adam, you can post it there. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. So again, thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.